Hi all. The topic for this week is NPO, the governance part. So this will be an overview of this class. So we will discuss Najam's C model for government and NPO relations. And then we will discuss cooperation in Korea between government and NPOs. And that includes government subsidy and contract out. And then we will move on to discuss fundings of NPOs, and that includes government funding and donations. So, starting with the definition of a governance, it is used to explain the relationship between nonprofits and governments. In other words, it is a relation and interaction between government and nonprofit organizations, as well as the conditions and rules that frame them, uh, which give rise to goal setting, steering, and implementation regarding public issues. So you remember the Assistance for Nonprofit and Non-Governmental Organization Act, right? In here, it states the roles of a government regarding the relations between nonprofits. This includes governments selecting projects and providing subsidies, open types of subsidized public activities to nonprofits annually, and applying open competitions when they uh, uh, decide one individual upon individual projects for subsidies. We would discuss further today. So, according to Najam's 4Cs model, it explains different types of government and nonprofit relations. This model uses two criteria, including means and goals. Based on uh, Based on this, there are four different models. The first is cooperation, which is basically government and nonprofits having similar policy goals and similar means, like strategies to achieve them. The exemplary relations is NPOs acting as contractors of government service provision. So the second model is confrontation, and this happens when government and NPOs consider each other's goals and strategies opposed to each other. Governments may repress NPOs using their core civil powers, and NPOs resist to particular governmental policies or press. The third model is complementarity, meaning that governments and NPOs share similar goals but prefer different strategies. When goals are similar, they work together independently or through contracts. For example, NPOs move in to fill a function that might otherwise be expected of governments. But when government is unable to perform. The last model of this Nazam's 4Cs model is co-optation, where government and NPOs share similar strategies but prefer different goals. It could be using a power asymmetry to change the preferences of each side. However, this is not common. So, when it comes to the case of Korea, There are two types of cooperation between NPOs and government. The first is governments providing subsidies for NPOs' social service programs. The second is government contracting out government programs to NPOs. So let's look at the subsidy type of a cooperation between governments and NPOs first. Governments provide programs to support NPOs annually following NPO laws. The process is like on slides. NPOs submit applications, governments make decisions, and NPOs implement the plan. And then there is first subsidy assignment and midterm evaluation. Then there is a second subsidy assignment and final report should be submitted by NPOs to government. Lastly, there is total evaluation and program cost calculation. So in 2023, a total of 180 NPO programs are selected out of 251 by the Ministry of Interior and Safety. Also, government announces a list of NPOs that committed a negative execution of programs and take subsidies back that are short of the total evaluation. And also, they announce NPOs that illegally accept the subsidies. Then there is contract out regarding government and NPO relations. This means to entrust some of the duties of an administrative body prescribed by laws to a legal entity other than a local government or to an organization or individual thereof to be exercised in its name and under its responsibility. So one of the example is No One Goes Daycare Center's case. They post announcement on website for the recruitment of contractors for the daycare center. The important part is that the facility belongs to government and they are looking for entities to run the daycare center with experience and expertise. So for the case of 노원구, 꽃동산 학원 is selected, which is an NPO that provides educational services. So there is a theory to explain government and NPO relations, which is called principal agent theory. This explains that divergence of owner operation brings information asymmetry between principal and agent. Because of the difficulties in monitoring, it causes hidden actions of agents that lead to moral hazard. Also, information asymmetry can cause hidden knowledge of agent that leads to adverse selection. So, in order to overcome this problem, principals should provide relevant incentive or punishment to agent. And move on to the funding side of the NPOs. There are two major funding sources of NPOs, which are government funding and donation. So there are two views on government funding regarding NPOs. The first is that NPOs need government funding, and the second is that NPOs do not need government funding. The reason that NPOs need government funding is that many times NPO government relations are intercomplementary rather than confrontational. There is a myth of volunteerism which argues that NPOs should run without government funding, but only with civic volunteers. However, the people who support government funding for NPOs criticized the myth as unrealistic because it is based on the assumption of a conflict between NPO and government relations to require NPOs to be independent and neutral rather than collaborative. For Korean case, we can agree that the idea of NPOs being independent without government funding, but in Korean situation, it is inevitable. For NPOs, financial independence is hard to achieve in Korea. For those who support NPOs who support that NPOs need government funding, there is a subsidy theory. It says government funding is necessary for NPOs to provide services that government is reluctant to provide. Social public programs that run by NPOs have important positions in social policy. Also, government funding on NPOs are increasing in both the US and in Korea. For this reason, from the side of the government, NPOs cost lesser on service provision than government organizations that are governed by regulations and bureaucracy. Also, NPOs can fulfill diverse preference among the public as well with their diverse backgrounds. Further, NPOs would have lesser political influence. For the NPO side, government offer procedural fairness that is grounded on democracy. Government offer criteria for service quality control that could offer NPOs to improve their services and reliable resources. However, on the other side, for NPOs, there are people who think NPOs do not need government funding. They believe that receiving resources from government, which NPOs should monitor, raise question about their role. In other words, government funding can control NPOs' work. Also, NPOs would be more likely to rely on government and become less likely to be independent. The influence of wealthy donors may raise concerns about outcomes and processes as well. So, when we look at the government funding in Korea, President Office announced the result of auditing of NPO subsidy in 2023. For last 3 years, 12,000 NPOs received 6.5 trillion won. That includes all 29 central government agencies' subsidies to NPOs. And according to the results, 1,865 wrong usage of government funding. That is about an amount of 1.1 trillion won. This includes embezzlement, rebate, false receipt, fraudulent usage, and insider trading. So we will look at the examples in depth. An NPO created a paper company with a fake facility and equipment and illegally received a job project subsidy of 31.1 million won. And the director of a local children's center forged a transfer certificate with Photoshop to embezzle operating expenses and allegedly held a single event multiple times by manipulating the banner in the photo. So there was institutional reform. Originally, it was only the head organizations who can receive a subsidy. It was the head organization that receive the subsidy are under receiving the monitoring. Second, external monitoring for projects over 300 million won. And third, no rules for rejoining the projects for NPOs receiving subsidies wrongly. Fourth, management is based on the discretion of the public organization. Fifth, reports on citizens for corruption are limited to certain agency. And when we look at the reform, first, monitoring is expanded to organizations that work under the head fund receiver. Second, external monitoring for projects over 100 million won. Third, NPOs that falsely receive funds is excluded for projects for 5 years. And fourth, management of subsidy implementation by newly created Subsidy Enforcement Review Task Force. Fifth, facilitating citizen reporting corruption on subsidy using Government 24 and they increased the rewards. So this was it for today, and when we look at the summary, first one is Nazam's 4Cs model that explains the government and NPO relations. And then we've take a look at the cooperation in Korea between government and NGOs. And that includes government subsidy and contracting out. And then we move on to the discussion regarding fundings of the NPOs. And that includes the government funding and donation. And we take look at the government funding part in depth.